My hands were shaking as I held the scissors against the worn fabric of my baby blanket. Something hard was definitely sewn inside, something that shouldn't be there. I could feel my heart pounding as I carefully cut along the seam, trying not to damage whatever was hidden inside. The fabric gave way easily, like it had been opened and sewn back together many times before. As I peeled back the cotton lining, my breath caught in my throat. There, wrapped in plastic, were documents and photographs that made my blood run cold. These weren't the family photos I expected to find. These were legal papers, insurance documents, and pictures that showed things I was never supposed to see. But let me go back to the beginning, to how I even found this blanket in the first place. 3 weeks ago, my grandmother Rose passed away. She was the only family I had left after my parents died in a car accident when I was 5 years old. Grandma Rose raised me, loved me, and gave me everything I needed to become the woman I am today. When she died, I felt like I lost my anchor to the world. The funeral was small but beautiful. My husband Thomas held my hand as we said goodbye to the woman who meant everything to me. His mother Helen had come to stay with us for a few weeks to help during this difficult time. At first, I was grateful for her support. Helen seemed genuinely caring, bringing me tea when I cried and offering to help sort through Grandma's belongings. After the funeral, I went to Grandma's house to start the painful process of going through her things. The house felt so empty without her warm presence filling every corner. I walked through each room, touching her favorite chair, smelling her perfume that still lingered in the bedroom, trying to hold on to every memory I could. But there was one thing I desperately needed to find: my baby blanket. It was pale yellow with tiny white flowers, soft from years of love and washing. Grandma had kept it safe for me all these years, and it was the only thing I had left from my mother. My mom had made it for me before I was born, stitching every flower by hand with such care. Grandma always told me that my mother had sewn special surprises inside the blanket, little pockets with family photos and mementos that would be mine when I was ready. I searched everywhere. I looked through every closet, every drawer, every box in the attic. I checked under beds, behind furniture, in the basement storage room. The blanket was nowhere to be found. I was starting to panic. How could something so important just disappear? Helen found me crying in Grandma's bedroom, surrounded by boxes and scattered belongings. "What's wrong, dear?" she asked, sitting down beside me on the bed. "I can't find my baby blanket," I sobbed. "Grandma always kept it safe for me. She promised it would be here when I needed it." Helen's eyes seemed to light up with interest. "A baby blanket? What did it look like?" I described it to her in detail, telling her about the yellow fabric, the white flowers, and how my mother had made it specially for me. I even mentioned what Grandma had told me about the hidden pockets with family photos inside. "How interesting," Helen said, her voice strange. "And you're sure your grandmother kept important things in this blanket?" "Yes," I said, wiping my tears. "She always said my mother hid special memories inside it for me to find someday." Helen stood up quickly. "Well, I'll help you look for it. We'll search every inch of this house until we find it." For the next 2 days, Helen helped me search. She was almost too eager, going through boxes and bags with an intensity that surprised me. She kept asking questions about what exactly might be hidden in the blanket, what kind of photos or papers my mother might have put inside. Her questions felt strange, but I was too upset to think clearly about why she was so interested. On the 3rd day, I was ready to give up. We had searched everywhere twice. The blanket was simply gone. Maybe Grandma had donated it by mistake, or maybe it had been lost years ago and she just never told me. My heart was breaking all over again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my mother's hands stitching that blanket, about all the love she had sewn into every thread. Around midnight, I decided to get a glass of water. As I walked past the kitchen window, I saw something that made me freeze. Helen was outside by the garbage cans, and she was holding something yellow in her hands. Even in the dim light from the street lamp, I could see the tiny white flowers on the fabric. It was my blanket. My precious baby blanket that we had supposedly searched everywhere for. I watched in shock as Helen lifted the lid of the garbage can and threw my blanket inside like it was worthless trash. She looked around nervously, then hurried back into the house through the back door. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. Helen had found my blanket and instead of telling me, she had thrown it away. But why? Why would she do something so cruel? And if she had found it, where had it been all this time? I waited until I heard her bedroom door close. Then I crept outside in my pajamas and bare feet. The garbage can was cold and smelled terrible. But I didn't care. I dug through banana peels and coffee grounds until my fingers touched the familiar softness of my blanket. As I pulled it out, I noticed something immediately. The blanket felt different. Heavier. There were definitely hard objects sewn inside the lining that hadn't been there before, or at least that I had never noticed. My hands found several lumpy areas along the edges and corners. I took the blanket back to my bedroom and examined it under the lamp. The stitching along one edge looked newer, different from the rest. Someone had opened this blanket and sewn it back together. That's when I knew I had to see what was inside. I barely slept that night, clutching my recovered blanket against my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Helen's face in the darkness as she threw away the most precious thing I owned. The woman who had been bringing me tea and offering comfort had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. But why? What could she possibly gain from destroying something that meant everything to me? The next morning, I hid the blanket in my bedroom closet before Helen woke up. I needed time to think, to figure out what was really going on. When she came downstairs for breakfast, she acted completely normal, asking how I slept and if I wanted her to make pancakes. "Any luck finding that special blanket of yours?" she asked casually, buttering her toast. I stared at her across the kitchen table, searching her face for any sign of guilt. "No," I said slowly. "Still haven't found it anywhere. That's such a shame," Helen said, shaking her head. "I know how much it meant to you. Maybe it's time to accept that it's just gone, dear. Sometimes we have to let go of the past to move forward." Her words felt like a slap. How dare she tell me to let go when she was the one who had thrown it away? I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but something held me back. The way she had looked around nervously last night, the way she was asking so many questions about what might be hidden inside the blanket, there was more to this story. "You're probably right," I said, forcing a smile. "I should focus on the future, instead of dwelling on old things." Helen's face relaxed, and she patted my hand. "That's the spirit. Now, I was thinking we could go back to your grandmother's house today and finish sorting through her belongings. There might be other treasures to find." The way she said treasures made my skin crawl. I agreed to go with her, but my mind was racing. Helen was still looking for something. The blanket hadn't been enough. There was something else she wanted from Grandma's house. We spent the morning going through more boxes in Grandma's attic. Helen was like a woman possessed, opening every container, checking every pocket, examining every piece of paper. She was being careful to look helpful, but I could see the desperation in her movements. "What exactly are we looking for?" I asked, watching her rifle through a box of old Christmas decorations. "Oh, just anything that might be valuable or important," she said without looking up. "Sometimes elderly people hide things in the strangest places: money, jewelry, important documents." "What kind of documents?" Helen's hands stilled for just a moment. "You know, insurance papers, wills, that sort of thing. Your grandmother lived through the Depression. That generation never trusted banks completely." I nodded like that made sense, but alarm bells were ringing in my head. Helen knew something about Grandma's hiding places. She knew about the blanket, and she was looking for something specific. That afternoon, Thomas came home from work early to check on me. Helen immediately switched into perfect mother-in-law mode, fussing over him and asking about his day. But I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, studying my face like she was trying to read my thoughts. "How's the house cleaning going?" Thomas asked, kissing my cheek. "We're making good progress," Helen answered before I could speak. "Jessica's being so brave about going through everything. I think we've found most of the important things." "Have you found everything you were looking for, Jessica?" Thomas asked me directly. I felt Helen's eyes boring into me. "Not everything," I said carefully. "But I'm starting to think some things are just meant to stay lost." Helen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes that's for the best, don't you think?" That evening, after Thomas went to bed, I pretended to go to sleep early too, but I stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the house. Around 11 o'clock, I heard Helen's bedroom door open and her footsteps going downstairs. I waited a few minutes, then crept to the window. She was in our backyard, talking on her phone. I couldn't hear the words, but her body language was agitated. She kept pacing back and forth, gesturing with her free hand like she was arguing with someone. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes before she hung up and came back inside. I lay in bed thinking about everything that had happened. Helen had thrown away my blanket, but not before opening it and possibly taking something out or putting something in. She was desperately searching Grandma's house for something specific, and now she was making secret phone calls in the middle of the night. The next morning, Helen announced that she needed to run some errands in town. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I ran to my closet and pulled out the blanket. In the bright morning light, I could see even more clearly that someone had tampered with it. The stitching along the bottom edge was definitely different, newer thread in a slightly different color. I spread the blanket on my bed and ran my hands over every inch of it. There were at least 4 or 5 hard objects sewn inside, scattered around the edges and corners. They felt like folded papers, maybe some small flat objects. My heart was pounding as I realized that whatever was hidden inside this blanket was important enough for Helen to risk everything to get it. But why throw the blanket away if she wanted what was inside, unless she had already taken what she needed and was trying to get rid of the evidence? Or maybe she had put something inside that she didn't want me to find. I heard a car door slam outside and quickly hid the blanket again. Helen was back earlier than expected. I ran downstairs and pretended to be making lunch. "Did you find everything you needed in town?" I asked, as she came through the door. "Yes, mostly," she said, but she looked stressed. "Jessica, I've been thinking, maybe I should head home soon. You and Thomas need time to grieve privately, and I don't want to overstay my welcome." This was new. Yesterday she had been talking about staying for another week. Something had changed. Something had made her want to leave quickly. "Are you sure?" I asked. "You've been such a help." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "But before I go, I was wondering if you found anything else of value at your grandmother's house. Any papers or documents that might be important?" There it was again. She was still looking for something, and she was running out of time to find it. "Nothing important," I lied. "Just old recipes and birthday cards." Helen nodded, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. Whatever she was looking for, she hadn't found it yet. And I was starting to suspect that the answer was sewn inside the blanket she had tried so hard to throw away. That afternoon, after Helen left to pack her things, I locked my bedroom door and spread the blanket across my bed. My hands were trembling as I examined every inch of the fabric. The weight difference was unmistakable now that I was really paying attention. Whatever was hidden inside felt substantial, like multiple documents or photographs. I found the scissors in my sewing kit and took a deep breath. This blanket was all I had left of my mother, but I needed to know what Helen was so desperate to find. I carefully cut along the seam where the stitching looked newest, trying to preserve as much of the original fabric as possible. The first thing that fell out made my heart stop. It was a photograph, but not the kind of family picture I had expected. It showed a car accident scene, twisted metal and broken glass scattered across a dark road. Written on the back in my grandmother's handwriting were the words, "March 15th, 2001, the night everything changed." March 15th, 2001. That was the night my parents died. With shaking hands, I continued cutting the seam. More photographs spilled out, each one more disturbing than the last. Pictures of the accident from different angles, close-ups of the damage to both cars, and then something that made my blood freeze. A photograph of a woman walking away from the scene, her face partially visible in the streetlight. It was Helen. 23 years younger, but definitely Helen. I sat down hard on the bed, my mind reeling. Why would my grandmother have photographs of Helen at my parents' accident? How was that even possible? Helen had only come into our lives 5 years ago when she met Thomas at his office. She was supposed to be a stranger to our family. I kept cutting, my hands moving automatically, while my brain tried to process what I was seeing. More documents fell out. Insurance papers, police reports, and what looked like copies of official accident investigation files. Everything was related to the night my parents died. One document made me gasp out loud. It was an insurance claim form, and Helen's name was on it. Not as a witness or a victim, but as a beneficiary. She had collected money from my parents' death. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly shoved everything back into the blanket, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was a soft knock on my bedroom door. "Jessica, are you okay in there?" It was Helen's voice, sweet and concerned. "I'm fine," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just taking a nap. I wanted to let you know I'll be leaving first thing in the morning. Thomas is driving me to the airport." "Okay," I managed. "Have a safe trip." I waited until I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway before I pulled the documents back out. There was so much more hidden in the blanket. Bank statements, copies of checks, and what looked like correspondence between Helen and an insurance company. The dates went back over 20 years. One letter made everything click into place. It was from Helen to someone named Robert, dated just 3 months after my parents' accident. In it, she wrote about how the plan worked perfectly and how no one suspected anything. She mentioned collecting the insurance money and how she would lay low for a few years before making contact with the planet. Family again. The leader of greater. The family. She meant my family. She had been planning to get close to us all along. I found more letters, more evidence of a conspiracy that went deeper than I could have imagined. Helen hadn't just been at the scene of my parents' accident. She had caused it. The documents showed payments to someone who had tampered with my father's car, making the brakes fail at just the right moment. She had orchestrated their deaths for insurance money. But there was more, much more. Helen had been watching me grow up from a distance, waiting for the right moment to insert herself into my life. When I married Thomas, she had somehow arranged to meet him at his workplace, pretending to be a lonely widow looking for friendship. She had manipulated her way into becoming his mother figure, and eventually, into our family. The most chilling document was a recent one, dated just 6 months ago. It was a letter from Helen to the same Robert, talking about how she had finally gotten close enough to finish what we started. She mentioned searching for the evidence Rose had hidden and how she needed to find it before the girl figured out the truth. The girl. She meant me. My grandmother had known. Somehow, Grandma Rose had discovered Helen's involvement in my parents' death and had been collecting evidence for years. She had hidden it all in my baby blanket, the one place Helen would never think to look because it seemed so innocent and sentimental. I heard a car door slam outside and looked out the window. Helen was loading her suitcase into Thomas's car, but she kept looking back at the house with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't the kind, motherly face she usually wore. It was cold and calculating, like a predator watching its prey. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Taking Mom to her hotel. Back in an hour. Love you." I realized this might be my only chance to confront Helen before she disappeared forever. But as I watched her get into the car, I saw her pull out her phone and make a call. Even from the second floor, I could see the tension in her body language. She was talking quickly, gesturing with her free hand like she was giving urgent instructions to someone. When she hung up, she looked directly up at my bedroom window. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. She knew. Somehow, she knew that I had found the evidence. I ducked away from the window, my heart racing. Helen wasn't just leaving town, she was running. And if she was desperate enough to kill my parents for money 23 years ago, what would she do to protect herself now? I looked down at the scattered documents on my bed, evidence of murder and conspiracy that could put Helen in prison for the rest of her life. But I also realized something terrifying. If Helen knew I had found the truth, I might be in more danger than I could imagine. The car pulled out of the driveway, but instead of heading toward town and the hotel, it turned in the opposite direction. Helen wasn't going to any hotel. She was coming back, and I had a feeling she wouldn't be alone. I grabbed my phone and tried calling Thomas, but it went straight to voicemail. My hands were shaking as I gathered all the documents and photographs, stuffing them into a large envelope. I needed to get out of the house, but first I had to make copies of everything. This evidence was the only proof of what Helen had done, and I couldn't risk losing it. I ran downstairs to Thomas's home office and started feeding documents through the scanner, my eyes constantly darting to the windows. Every shadow outside made my heart jump. The photographs of the accident scene looked even more horrifying under the bright office lights. My parents' car was completely destroyed, crushed beyond recognition. How had I never questioned the official story? How had no one investigated further? As I scanned the insurance documents, I noticed something I had missed before. Helen hadn't just collected money from my parents' death, she had taken out multiple policies on them in the months leading up to the accident. She had somehow gotten access to their personal information and forged their signatures. The total payout was over $2 million. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Thomas. "Hey, something weird happened," he said, his voice confused. I dropped Mom at the hotel, but when I was driving away, I saw her get into another car with some guy I've never seen before. When I called her to ask about it, she said it was just an old friend picking her up for dinner. "Thomas, you need to come home right now," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "There's something I need to show you about your mother." "What do you mean, Jessica? You're scaring me." "Just come home, please. And Thomas, don't tell Helen you're coming back here." There was a long pause. "Okay, I'm on my way." I hung up and continued scanning documents, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely feed the papers through the machine. One of the letters mentioned Robert's full name, Robert Sterling, and described him as someone who specialized in making accidents look natural. Helen had hired a professional killer to murder my parents. The sound of gravel crunching in the driveway made me freeze. Through the office window, I could see a dark sedan pulling up to the house. It wasn't Thomas's car. Two figures got out, Helen and a tall man I had never seen before. Even from a distance I could tell he looked dangerous. This had to be Robert. I quickly saved the scanned files to a flash drive and emailed copies to myself. Then I grabbed the original documents and ran upstairs, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I could hear voices outside, Helen's familiar tone mixed with a deeper male voice I didn't recognize. From my bedroom window, I watched them approach the front door. Helen was pointing up at my window, talking rapidly to the man beside her. He nodded and pulled something from his jacket, something that glinted in the porch light. I had to get out of the house, but they were at the front door and my bedroom was on the second floor. The back door was my only option, but I would have to go downstairs and risk running into them. The doorbell rang, followed by Helen's voice calling out sweetly. "Jessica, are you home, dear? I forgot something and came back to get it." I stuffed the documents under my mattress and crept to the top of the stairs. I could hear Helen trying the door handle, then the sound of metal scraping against metal. They were picking the lock. "She's definitely here." Helen's voice was different now, colder. "Her car is in the garage, and the lights are on upstairs." "Then we do this quick and clean," the man replied. "Make it look like a break-in gone wrong. The girl was in the wrong place at the wrong time." My blood turned to ice. They were planning to kill me, just like they had killed my parents. I had to get out, but the front door was no longer an option. I remembered the old oak tree outside my bedroom window, the one I used to climb as a teenager when I would sneak out to meet friends. The branches were strong enough to hold me, and I could climb down to the backyard. I heard the front door open just as I was pushing up my bedroom window. Helen's voice drifted up from downstairs, no longer sweet and motherly. "Check upstairs, Robert. I'll search down here for any evidence she might have found." Heavy footsteps started climbing the stairs. I threw one leg over the windowsill, then the other, reaching for the familiar branch that had been my escape route so many years ago. The bark was rough under my hands, and for a terrifying moment I thought I might fall. But muscle memory kicked in, and I managed to climb down to the lower branches. I was almost to the ground when I heard Helen's voice from my bedroom window above. "She's not here, but the window is open. Check the backyard." I dropped the last few feet and ran toward the neighbor's fence, staying low and trying to use the darkness as cover. Behind me, I could hear the back door slam open and footsteps pounding across the deck. "There!" Robert's voice shouted. "She's heading for the fence." I scrambled over the wooden fence just as I heard something whistle past my ear. He was shooting at me. I landed hard on the other side, pain shooting through my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. The neighbor's house was dark. They were probably asleep or away. I limped through their backyard and onto the street, pulling out my phone to call 911. But before I could dial, a car came screeching around the corner. It was Thomas, driving way too fast and looking panicked. He slammed on the brakes when he saw me. "Jessica! What are you doing out here? What happened to your leg? Get in the car!" I screamed, hobbling toward him. "Helen and some man are trying to kill me. They killed my parents." Thomas looked confused, but he could see the terror in my eyes. I threw myself into the passenger seat just as Robert came running around the corner of the house, still holding his gun. "Drive!" I yelled. "Drive now!" Thomas floored the accelerator, and we sped away into the night. In the rearview mirror, I could see Robert standing in the street, talking rapidly into his phone. They would be following us soon. "Jessica, what the hell is going on?" Thomas demanded, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "What do you mean my mother killed your parents?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the email I had sent myself with the scanned documents. "Your mother has been lying to us about everything. She murdered my parents 23 years ago for insurance money, and now she's trying to kill me because I found the proof." Thomas pulled into the police station parking lot, his face pale with shock. He had been silent for most of the drive, occasionally glancing at the documents on my phone with disbelief and horror. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I can't believe this. My own mother. How could I have been so blind?" "She's a master manipulator," I said, squeezing his hand. "She fooled everyone for over 20 years. Inside the police station, Detective Martinez listened to our story with growing amazement. I showed him the photographs, the insurance documents, and the letters that proved Helen's involvement in my parents' murder. His expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. "This is incredible," he said, studying a photograph of Helen at the accident scene. "We'll need to verify all of this, but if it's authentic, we're looking at a conspiracy that goes back decades." "There's more," I said, pulling up the email with the scanned files. Helen mentioned someone named Robert Sterling in her letters. "He's the one who helped her kill my parents, and he's with her now. They tried to kill me tonight." Detective Martinez immediately put out an alert for Helen and Robert. Within an hour, patrol cars had surrounded the hotel where Thomas had dropped Helen off, but they were long gone. The desk clerk confirmed that Helen had never actually checked in. "We'll find them," Detective Martinez assured us. "With this evidence, we can track their financial records, their phone calls, everything. They can't hide forever." The next morning, the investigation moved quickly. The FBI got involved because of the insurance fraud across state lines. They discovered that Helen and Robert had been running similar schemes for years, targeting families and staging accidents to collect insurance money. My parents weren't their first victims, and I wouldn't have been their last. Thomas was devastated. The woman he had thought of as his mother for 5 years had been using him to get close to me, waiting for the right moment to eliminate the last witness to her crimes. She had manipulated his emotions, his trust, his love, all while planning to murder his wife. "I should have seen the signs," he kept saying. "The way she asked so many questions about your family, how interested she was in your grandmother's belongings." "She was a professional," I reminded him. "This is what she did for a living. You couldn't have known." 3 days later, the police got a break. Helen and Robert had been spotted at a gas station 2 states away. But when officers arrived, they found Robert's body in the motel room. He had been shot once in the head. Helen was nowhere to be found, but there were signs of a struggle. Detective Martinez called us with the news. "It looks like Helen eliminated her partner. Maybe he was demanding too much money, or maybe she just didn't want to share. Either way, she's now considered extremely dangerous and is wanted for multiple murders." The manhunt for Helen lasted 2 weeks. During that time, I learned more about my parents' death than I had ever known. The FBI investigation revealed that Helen had been watching our family for months before the accident. She had gotten a job at the insurance company where my father worked, gaining access to his personal information and learning about his daily routines. The night of the accident, Robert had tampered with my father's car while it was parked at his office. The brake lines were cut just enough to fail after a few miles of driving. My parents never had a chance. What hurt the most was learning that my grandmother had suspected the truth for years. She had hired a private investigator after the accident, because something about the official story never felt right to her. When the investigator uncovered evidence of Helen's involvement, Grandma Rose had been too afraid to go to the police. Helen had threatened her, warning that if she ever spoke up, I would be next. So my grandmother had spent the last 20 years of her life collecting evidence and hiding it in the one place she knew Helen would never think to look, my baby blanket. She had been protecting me the only way she knew how, gathering proof while keeping me safe. Helen was finally caught at a bus station in Oregon, trying to flee to Canada with a fake passport. When the police arrested her, she was carrying over $50,000 in cash and a gun. She didn't resist, but she also didn't confess. Even when faced with overwhelming evidence, she maintained her innocence. The trial lasted 6 months. I testified about finding the evidence in my baby blanket, and about the night Helen and Robert tried to kill me. Thomas testified about how Helen had manipulated her way into our lives. The insurance investigators testified about the fraudulent policies and the suspicious timing of the payouts. Helen's defense attorney tried to claim that she was being framed, that someone else had planted the evidence in my blanket. But the prosecution had too much proof: fingerprints, handwriting analysis, financial records, and witness testimony that placed her at the scene of multiple crimes. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding Helen guilty on all counts: 2 counts of first-degree murder for my parents, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and attempted murder for the attack on me. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, Thomas and I began the long process of healing. We moved to a new house, unable to stay in the place where Helen had tried to kill me. Thomas started therapy to deal with the betrayal and guilt he felt about bringing Helen into our lives. I kept my baby blanket, carefully repairing the seams where I had cut them open. It was still the last connection I had to my mother, but now it represented something more. It was proof that love and truth could survive even the darkest deceptions. My grandmother had risked everything to protect me and ensure that justice would eventually be served. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking about how close Helen came to getting away with everything. But then I remember that evil rarely wins in the end. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's been buried for decades. My parents finally had justice, and I finally had peace.